I had just come back to visit my dad in his house when I heard him screaming loudly from his HOA cabin compound. My heart skipped a beat. Without thinking, I threw the car door open and sprinted toward the back of the property. The chilling sound of his voice echoed through the quiet neighborhood, slicing through the late afternoon air like a knife. "Let go of me, this is my property, you have no right," he shouted. As I reached the clearing around the historic $750,000 HOA cabin, the pride of my father's retirement dreams, I froze at the disturbing sight before me. HOA Karen. That's what the entire neighborhood secretly called her. Real name, Linda Griffin, the self-appointed dictator of our homeowners association. Her voice was as shrill as ever, but it wasn't just her presence that made my blood boil. 2 bulky security guards were holding my father by the arms, dragging him across the gravel like a criminal. My father, a 72-year-old retired architect, was wearing his old flannel shirt, torn at the collar from the struggle. His face was red with rage and confusion, and his cane had been tossed to the side like trash. "What the hell is going on here?" I yelled, storming into the scene. Linda didn't flinch. She turned, lifted her designer sunglasses, and sneered. "This is a private matter between the HOA and Mr. Thatcher. You need to step aside." I ignored her and ran to my father, who was now trying to steady himself. "They said I've violated HOA codes," he gasped. "They said the cabin has to come down." "What?" My voice cracked from the sheer audacity of it. Linda stepped forward, one bony finger pointing at the beautifully preserved cabin behind us. "That structure is not compliant with neighborhood aesthetics. It's outdated and doesn't align with our community's visual integrity. It's a registered historical structure," I barked. "It was approved before this HOA even existed." She waved her hand dismissively. "Well, we've recently revised our policies." I took a deep breath, trying to keep my temper in check. "You don't get to manhandle a senior citizen and destroy his property just because you don't like how it looks. I suggest you step away." She gave a tight smile. "And who are you to suggest anything?" I hesitated only for a moment. I hadn't revealed my position to anyone in this town since returning, but the rage building inside me was becoming impossible to contain. I turned to the security guards. "If you don't take your hands off my father right now, I will personally make sure you're both charged with assault and unlawful detainment." They paused. I could see the uncertainty flash in their eyes. I pulled out my badge. The air went still. "I'm Chief Ethan Thatcher. I've just returned from my assignment downtown, and as of last week I've resumed my position as police chief." Linda blinked, her fake confidence crumbling slightly. "I highly suggest," I continued, "that you let go of my father, leave this property immediately, and prepare to explain why you brought unauthorized force against a homeowner on private property." She took a step back, but just as I thought they were going to back off, one of the guards reached for a folded document and handed it to me. "We were instructed to deliver this." I snatched the paper and unfolded it. My heart dropped. "Demolition order, effective immediately, issued by HOA Enforcement Division." I stared at it in disbelief. "They already filed for a contractor," Linda said calmly. "They're on their way." My dad looked like he'd been punched in the gut. "This is illegal," I growled. "And if they show up here, they'll be arrested on sight." "Oh, you'll want to be careful with that," she replied smugly. "Because this," she pointed to the document, "has already been authorized by a judge." I scanned the fine print, my fists clenched. She was right, there was a court stamp and signature. But something wasn't adding up. The name of the judge wasn't from our local district. It was from a different county altogether. "Did you use an out-of-jurisdiction judge for this order?" She smirked. "That's a federal violation," I muttered. "You're in serious trouble." Just then, a loud rumble interrupted us. We all turned toward the street. A flatbed truck with demolition equipment was rolling down the road headed straight for the cabin. My dad's mouth dropped open. "They're early," Linda said, looking unbothered. "Guess they're excited to start." The truck began slowing at the edge of our driveway. I ran to block it, badge in hand, but as I did, my phone buzzed. I glanced at the screen. Incoming call, Mayor J. Peterson. Something told me this was bigger than I'd thought. I answered. "Ethan," the mayor's voice came through. "We have a problem, a serious one." I frowned. "What kind of problem?" He hesitated. Linda has connections. She's been making threats, and she may have blackmailed a sitting judge to sign that demolition order. My pulse quickened. You've got to be kidding me. And then the mayor dropped the bombshell. She's not just targeting your dad. You're next. The moment the mayor's words hit my ears, I felt a wave of dread settle over me. You're next. Those two words echoed in my head like a threat from a nightmare. I stared down at my father's pale face, his tired eyes still locked on the demolition truck that had just pulled into our driveway. I turned and waved at the driver, flashing my badge. Turn around and leave. This is police property now. The driver slowed down, confused. I was ordered to. Turn. Around. Now. I barked. Something in my voice must have told him I wasn't playing around. He muttered into his walkie-talkie, then slowly backed the truck out of the driveway. But deep down, I knew this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Linda stood still, her jaw tight. She wasn't yelling anymore. Instead, she looked like someone who had just been checkmated in a game she thought she was winning. I turned to her. You just tried to destroy my father's home with an illegally signed order. You're lucky I don't arrest you right now. You wouldn't dare, she hissed. I stepped closer and whispered, Try me. She narrowed her eyes but didn't respond. She motioned to her guards and stormed off toward her SUV. The two guards followed her like trained dogs. She didn't look back. I turned to my father. He was shaking slightly, his cane in one hand, the other gripping my arm. She was going to destroy everything, he whispered. Everything I worked for. I won't let that happen, I said firmly. Not while I'm here. But even as I said it, I knew I had to act fast. Something about the mayor's call haunted me. What did he mean I was next? I helped Dad inside and sat him down on the couch with a warm cup of tea. He looked exhausted. I'll make some calls, I said. We need to challenge that court order. He nodded weakly. I've been fighting them for months, Ethan. Letters, emails, they never responded. I thought I was going crazy. You're not, I told him. They've been pushing boundaries, and now they've gone too far. I stepped outside and called the mayor back. What else do you know? I asked him. He sighed. Look, Ethan, Linda has a cousin in the courthouse over in Grant County. Somehow she got him to push this demolition through fast. I got word from a clerk who was suspicious, but that's not all. What else? There's a recording, he said. From a board meeting. Someone leaked it to me anonymously. They're planning to go after certain homeowners, mostly the elderly, and force them out so they can sell their land to a developer. I clenched my jaw. And my father's on that list? Yes, and so are a few others in your area. It's a land grab scheme. I felt my hands shaking. I need that recording, I said. I'll send it to you now, the mayor replied. Seconds later, the audio file arrived on my phone. I pressed play. It was a woman's voice, Linda. If we get the cabin down, the rest will follow. That part of the neighborhood is the only thing standing in the way of the expansion. Once the old man's gone, it'll send a message. Then another voice said, What about Mr. Ethan Thatcher's house? Linda laughed. He's never around, and if he shows up, we'll deal with him too. My blood turned to fire. They were planning this. They were planning to hurt my father, and they didn't care who they took down to get what they wanted. I looked back at the cabin, standing proud and strong like a piece of forgotten history. My father had poured years of his life into restoring that place. Not on my watch. I went back inside, and Dad was already asleep on the couch. His tea untouched. The fight had drained him. I sat beside him and stared at the flickering light from the cabin windows. I wasn't just protecting a building. I was protecting my father, his dreams, his peace. And I was going to hit back. Hard. But just as I stood to go check the locks, a knock echoed at the front door. 3 loud, heavy knocks. I grabbed my sidearm and approached the door carefully. I opened it slowly. Standing there was a man in a black suit with slicked back hair and cold eyes. Can I help you? I asked. He held up a card. Name's Marcus Kane, legal representative for the Homeowners Association. I didn't take the card. I just stared at him. I've been sent here with a message, he continued. Your interference today has been noted. The HOA has full legal rights to enforce its mandates. If you get in the way again, you'll be dealt with officially. I stepped onto the porch. Are you threatening me? Consider this a warning. He turned and walked away. I watched him drive off into the night. I was no longer angry. I was ready. But I had no idea that what was coming next would shake my entire family to the core. The next morning, I woke up early. My father was still asleep, but I knew I had work to do. What happened yesterday wasn't just an attack on my dad, it was an attack on our family, our history, and everything we stood for. And now that I knew Linda and her crew had been planning this behind closed doors, I couldn't let it slide. I played the audio the mayor had sent me one more time, making sure I heard every word. The plan was clear. Push the old homeowners out, demolish their historic homes, and sell the land to developers for millions. And now that I'd stood in their way, they were targeting me next. I wasn't afraid, but I wasn't going to sit back either. I made 3 calls before 9 a.m. First, to the city's legal department. I requested an emergency hearing to challenge the demolition order. Second, to a friend at the local news station. I knew that if I wanted this story to explode, I had to make it public. And third, to my old partner from the force, Detective Harper. Harper, I said, I need your help digging into something dirty. You always call when it's dirty, she joked. I'm in. I briefed her on everything: Linda, the HOA, the illegal demolition order, and the mayor's warning. I'm going to send you that audio, I said. I want you to find out who else was in that meeting. You got it, she replied. After the calls, I sat on the porch and looked out at my father's era cabin. It still stood proud and untouched for now. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Harper. Found something. That judge who signed the order? He's under investigation for taking bribes. Your HOA lady might be deeper in this than you thought. Bribes. That explained a lot. At noon, I got a call from the city. They had scheduled an emergency hearing for the following morning. It wasn't much, but it bought us time. Time to gather more evidence. Time to prepare. I walked into my dad's kitchen to make coffee when I saw a man in a hoodie walking past the backyard. He didn't look like a jogger or a neighbor. He was slow, deliberate, watching. I stepped outside. Can I help you? I called out. He didn't answer. He turned down the street and disappeared behind a tall hedge. That wasn't normal. I walked back inside, locked every door, and checked the security cameras I'd installed years ago. Nothing. The angle didn't catch his face. Someone was watching us. I wasn't just angry now. I was on full alert. By the evening, Harper called again. You're not going to believe this, she said. I dug into the HOA financial records. There are huge payments made to a private security firm not registered with any proper licensing body. And guess what? That's the same company the 2 guards were from yesterday. So they're not even real security, I muttered. Nope, which means your dad was assaulted by hired thugs. I had everything I needed to file charges. But it didn't stop there. The news station aired the story that night. I sat beside my dad as the anchor read out the headline. HOA accused of targeting elderly homeowner in demolition scam. They played a snippet of the leaked audio. Linda's voice. Her laughter. Her arrogance. My dad leaned back and smiled. You really got them now. But I knew it wasn't over yet. At exactly 10 p.m., I got another visitor. This time, I was ready. I opened the door and saw a young woman in tears. Are you Chief Thatcher? She asked, shaking. I am. My grandmother lives down the street, she said. They sent her an eviction notice today. She's lived there for 40 years. I stepped outside. She's terrified, the woman continued. They said if she doesn't leave in 48 hours, they'll fine her every day until she can't pay. I felt my stomach twist. Take me to her, I said. She led me down the road to a small white house with rose bushes lining the fence. An elderly woman was sitting in a rocking chair, holding a paper with trembling hands. I read it. Same lawyer, same formatting, same threats. I looked her in the eyes. You're not leaving. I promise you that. I returned home furious. This wasn't just about my father anymore. This was bigger, deeper, crueler. It was war. I called Harper again. I want every record tied to this HOA. Every payment, every secret meeting. I want to know who's funding them, who's backing them, and how we burn them down legally. You got it, she said. By midnight, I was back outside, walking the perimeter of my father's property. That's when I saw it. A red X had been spray painted on the side of the cabin. A warning. They were marking the home for demolition. Or maybe worse. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on the porch with my weapon by my side, waiting. The darkness was quiet but heavy, and just before dawn, I heard footsteps again. This time I was ready. I jumped down the steps and followed the sound, moving silently. Through the trees, I caught a glimpse of a man with a camera. He was taking pictures of the cabin. "Hey!" I shouted. He ran. I chased him across 2 lawns and tackled him near a fence. "Who sent you?" I demanded. He struggled, but I had him pinned. "You're assaulting me," he yelled. I held up my badge. "I'm the police. Now talk." He hesitated. "They hired me. HOA. Said they needed pictures for their developer. Said the place was going to be flattened." I let him go but took his camera and wallet. I'd find out who he really was later. When I got back, my father was waiting. "You okay?" he asked. "No," I said honestly, "but I will be." At 9 a.m., I stood in court with our lawyer, the audio recording, and full documentation of the bribery links, fake security firm, and threats. Linda wasn't there. Her lawyer was. The judge listened, then nodded. "The demolition order is hereby suspended, pending full investigation. All HOA actions against the Thatcher property are now on legal hold." It was a win, but I could feel it in my gut. This wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. That night, as we sat down for dinner, my father smiled for the first time in days. "Proud of you, son." I was about to answer when the lights in the house went out. A second later, the security alarm blared. Someone had cut the power. I grabbed my flashlight and gun. Through the front window, I saw 4 shadowy figures moving toward the cabin. This wasn't just harassment anymore. This was war, and they just picked the wrong house. The lights were out. The alarm was blaring. 4 figures were moving toward the Era cabin in the dark. My father stood behind me, confused and scared. "Get down, Dad," I whispered, grabbing my flashlight and stepping toward the door. I opened it slowly and stepped outside, sweeping the flashlight across the lawn. I could barely see their faces, but their movements were clear. They were targeting the cabin. Not this time. I crept forward silently, using the bushes as cover. I could see them now: hoods, gloves, and crowbars. They weren't here to talk. I raised my voice. "Police, drop your weapons and get on the ground." They scattered instantly. One of them bolted toward the road, another ducked behind the shed. I chased the third. He was slower than the rest. He tried to leap over a fence, but I tackled him to the ground. "Who sent you?" I demanded. He hesitated, then gave up. "It was the HOA. They said you were trespassing on protected land. They said the cabin was being cleared tonight no matter what." I cuffed him and pulled out my phone. Harper picked up on the first ring. "They made a move," I told her. 4 men, armed, sent to destroy the cabin." "You have proof?" she asked. "Got one in cuffs." And he just confessed. "I'll get a warrant," she said. "It's time we shut this whole thing down." I handed the man off to a squad car that arrived minutes later. We found another attacker hiding behind the shed. The other 2 got away, but I had what I needed. Evidence, witnesses, and a confession. The next morning, the media swarmed the neighborhood. News vans parked outside the house. Reporters gathered around the property, snapping pictures of the cabin and the red spray-painted X still visible on the wall. Harper arrived at 8 a.m. with backup and a search warrant for the HOA office. We stormed their headquarters. Just a rented suite inside a strip mall found exactly what we were looking for. Stacks of unregistered security contracts. Evidence of forged documents, including demolition orders with fake stamps. Emails showing bribes to judges and promises to developers. But the real shock came from a locked drawer in Linda's desk. Inside was a list typed and highlighted. It was titled, Phase 1 Clear Out Plan. Underneath were the names of elderly homeowners across 3 neighborhoods. My father's name was near the top. So was the grandmother down the street. They planned to push all of them out and sell the land as one massive development. I stood there, holding the list, shaking with anger. How many families were they going to destroy for money? I asked. Harper answered quietly, too many. Linda was arrested at noon. The footage made every channel. She was still wearing her designer blazer, still holding her fake confidence. But the moment she saw me standing at the police station, she lost it. You think this is over? She screamed. You have no idea who you're messing with. I stepped forward. Actually, I do. And you just messed with the wrong family. She lunged toward me but was held back by officers. That image of her screaming and fighting was plastered all over the evening news. And when the rest of the community saw what she had done, everything changed. Residents who had been afraid to speak finally came forward. People who had been threatened, fined, or bullied for years told their stories. The HOA board crumbled. One by one, the other members resigned or were arrested. Developers pulled out of the land deal. The city launched a full investigation into HOA abuses across the county. But the best moment of all came a week later. We held a small community gathering in front of the cabin. The mayor was there. So were reporters, police, and neighbors. My father stood beside me, his hand on my shoulder. I'd like to make an announcement, the mayor said, stepping forward. This cabin is now protected as a historical landmark. It cannot be demolished, moved, or touched without direct approval from the Historical Preservation Committee. People clapped. My father had tears in his eyes. But more than that, the mayor continued, we're creating a new task force to review all HOA conduct in this area. No one should be bullied out of their home again, and that starts here, with this family. The crowd erupted in applause. I turned to my father. We did it. No, he said. You did it. We walked into the cabin together, the same way we used to when I was a kid. Everything looked the same. The old chairs, the wooden beams, the tiny fireplace. But something had changed. The fear was gone. A few days later, I got a call from the DA's office. Ethan, just wanted to let you know Linda took a deal. She's going away for a long time. I hung up and looked out at the peaceful yard. The roses were blooming again. The birds were singing. We were safe. And we weren't just rebuilding a house, we were rebuilding trust. But just as I began to relax, my phone buzzed again. Unknown number. I answered. A deep voice said, Chief Thatcher, we've been watching what you did out there. We could use someone like you at the state level. I froze. You interested? I stood on the porch, the phone still in my hand, staring out at the cabin that had nearly been destroyed. The voice on the line was calm but powerful. We could use someone like you at the state level. I paused before answering. Who is this? My name is Deputy Commissioner Reese. I work with the governor's office. We've been monitoring HOA abuses across the state, and what you just uncovered, it blew the lid off everything. I listened silently. We're putting together a special task force, he continued. People who aren't afraid to challenge corrupt systems, people who can lead investigations from inside. And you want me? I asked. You just dismantled an entire operation in a week. Yahweh wants you. It was a lot to process. My life had just calmed down. My father was safe. The cabin was protected. But deep down, I knew something like this. It didn't end at the neighborhood level. I had just scratched the surface. I told the commissioner I needed a day to think it through. He agreed and told me he'd call back. That night, I sat with my dad. We drank coffee by the fire in the Era Cabinor cabin. He looked at peace for the first time in a long while. You thinking of taking that job? He asked. I don't know, I replied. Part of me wants to stay here, make sure everything stays calm, but another part of me wants to go after the bigger fish. He nodded slowly. You're not just a good cop, Ethan. You're the kind of man who steps up when others step back. If this task force needs someone like that, maybe you should go. I didn't say anything at first, but I felt it. He was right. The next morning, I called Reese back. I'm in. Good, he said. We'll brief you next week. But even before that, things started moving fast. Detective Harper found more records, more HOAs doing the same things. Fake security, bribes, illegal evictions. One neighborhood had lost 6 elderly residents in 1 year, all pushed out by threats and forced sales. This was bigger than I'd ever imagined. And as word spread about Linda's arrest, I started getting calls from victims' people who had been scared to speak. One of them, a man named Tom, told me his wife died from stress after their HOA started fining them $500 a day for having a ramp at their front door. I built that ramp because she had cancer, he said, choking back tears. They didn't care. I promised him justice. As the task force formed, I met the others. There were 5 of us cops, lawyers, a former judge. Each one had been burned by a corrupt HOA or had seen firsthand how deep the damage ran. Our job was to investigate, gather proof, and dismantle the worst offenders. We were called the Neighborhood Integrity Division, but we had another name for ourselves. The Hammer Team, because when we came knocking, we weren't asking. One of our first cases took us 2 cities over, where an HOA president had been seizing homes from single mothers and veterans and flipping them to wealthy buyers. We went undercover. We gathered documents, emails, even footage of illegal evictions. And then we brought the hammer down. 6 arrests. 15 homes returned to their rightful owners. The local news started following our work. Soon, people started fighting back. Communities stood up. Board meetings were packed. Residents demanded transparency. It was working. But one night, back at my father's house, I got a letter slipped under the door. No return address. No name. Just one line typed in bold. You've made enemies. Watch your back. I folded the paper and put it away. I wasn't scared. I was ready. I had already faced the worst of them and won. Now, I wasn't just protecting my father's cabin. I was protecting others who couldn't fight for themselves. And I was just getting started. The next day, as I left for another mission, my dad stood by the gate and saluted me with a grin. Go get him, son. I nodded. Always. As I drove off, I looked at the rearview mirror one last time. The cabin stood strong in the morning light, peaceful, unshaken, a symbol of what we fought for and what we would never stop protecting. The battle for fairness may never truly end, but one thing is clear. When you stand up to injustice, you don't just change the rules, you change the game. Thank you so much for watching and staying with us through this emotional and powerful story. Your support, your time, and your love for stories like this mean everything. Every like, comment, and share helps us continue bringing you bold, gripping tales that inspire, entertain, and spark real conversations. Stay tuned for more incredible stories